The sound of my wine glass nearly shattering against the concrete patio should have warned everyone that something was terribly wrong. But my sister-in-law Stephanie was too busy basking in the shocked faces of our family members to notice my white knuckles or the way my entire body had gone rigid. "That's right," she announced with a triumphant smile, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "I'm putting Pine Valley Mountain Resort on the market next week. $3 million cash deal with developers." She paused dramatically, savoring the gasps from my cousins. Finally going to make something profitable out of that old place. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a smile, fighting every instinct to speak, because what Stephanie didn't know could destroy her completely. The barbecue continued around us, but I felt like I was watching everything through thick glass. My brother Jake flipped burgers on the grill, completely oblivious to the bomb his wife had just dropped. Cousin Marcus nearly choked on his beer, while Diana grabbed her husband's arm so hard he yelped. But all I could think about was Dorothy. Pine Valley Resort had been woven into the fabric of my soul since I was 7 years old. Every summer, my parents would pack our old station wagon with sleeping bags and coolers, driving 3 hours through winding mountain roads to reach Dorothy's little piece of paradise. The resort consisted of 12 rustic cabins, scattered among towering pine trees, a main lodge with a stone fireplace big enough to roast a whole pig, and 200 acres of pristine wilderness that bordered a national forest. Dorothy Richardson was Jake's grandmother on his father's side, but she'd always treated me like her own blood. She taught me to fish in the crystal-clear stream that ran behind the lodge, showed me which berries were safe to eat on nature walks, and let me help her tend the vegetable garden that supplied fresh produce for the resort's small restaurant. When I turned 16, she gave me my first real job, cleaning cabins and helping in the kitchen during peak season. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 22, Dorothy became my anchor. The resort was the only place where I could still feel their presence, hear their laughter echoing through the trees. I'd inherited some money from their life insurance, but I'd never touched it. It sat in a savings account like a monument to their memory. But 3 years ago, everything changed when Jake married Stephanie. I tried to like her. Really tried. She was beautiful in that high-maintenance way that required weekly salon appointments and designer everything. She worked as a real estate agent in the city and made no secret of her belief that Pine Valley was a complete waste of valuable land. "This place is a money pit, Dorothy," I remembered her saying during their engagement party at the lodge. "You could sell this property for millions and buy a nice condo in Florida. Live somewhere civilized for once." Dorothy had just smiled politely and changed the subject, but I'd seen the hurt in her eyes. The resort had been in her family for 60 years. Her husband built the first cabin with his own hands in 1963, and they'd slowly expanded it together until his death 15 years ago. The pressure from Stephanie had been relentless. Every family gathering became an opportunity for her to point out needed repairs, complain about the lack of cell phone service, or suggest better uses for the land. She'd bring real estate listings on her phone, showing Dorothy condos and retirement communities with swimming pools and golf courses. Then came that terrible phone call 5 years ago. "Valerie, honey, I need your help," Dorothy had said, her voice shaking. "I don't know who else to turn to." I'd driven up that same night, finding Dorothy sitting in her small apartment behind the main lodge, surrounded by stacks of medical bills and past due notices. The cancer had come back aggressive and expensive. Her insurance covered some treatments, but not the experimental therapy her doctors recommended. The resort hadn't been profitable in years. Most guests now preferred luxury hotels with spas and room service. "I can't afford to keep this place anymore," she'd whispered, tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. "The bank wants their money, and Stephanie keeps calling about buyers. But this land, Valerie, this is all I have left of Henry, all I have left of our life together." That night, I'd made a decision that would change everything. Using my inheritance, a small business loan, and every penny I'd saved, I bought Pine Valley Resort for $400,000. We structured it through an LLC to protect Dorothy's dignity and keep the family from knowing about her financial troubles. She could stay as the caretaker, receiving a monthly payment for maintenance and upkeep. To everyone else, it looked like she still owned the property. Dorothy had cried when we signed the papers. "You're saving my life, honey. But more than that, you're saving this place. Promise me you'll keep it as it is. Keep it wild and beautiful." I'd promised and I'd meant it. Now watching Stephanie smugly accept congratulations from relatives who thought she'd inherited the resort after Dorothy's peaceful death 6 months ago, I felt sick to my stomach. But the worst was yet to come. Actually, Stephanie continued, her voice rising above the conversation, "I've already got preliminary agreements signed. Closing is in 2 weeks. The developers are so excited about the project that they've already approved my loan for the Miami condo I'm buying with the proceeds." Marcus set down his beer so hard that foam splashed across the picnic table. "Wait, what, you've already signed papers?" Stephanie's smile widened. "Of course. I'm not stupid enough to let $3 million slip away because someone might have sentimental feelings about a bunch of old buildings." The words hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just inherited the resort through some legal loophole. She was actively trying to sell property she didn't own, property she had no legal claim to whatsoever, and she'd already spent money she would never receive. The confrontation started before I could even process what I'd heard. Diana stood up so quickly that her folding chair toppled backward, clattering against the concrete. "Stephanie, you can't just sell Dorothy's resort without talking to the family first," she said, her voice tight with anger. "That place has been in our family for 60 years. Dorothy always said it would stay that way." Stephanie's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Dorothy left everything to me, Diana. I have the will right here." She pulled out a manila folder from her oversized purse, waving it triumphantly. Dated and notarized, completely legal. Jake finally looked up from the grill, his face confused. "Steph, you didn't tell me you had the will already. I thought her lawyer was still handling the estate." "Some things are better handled efficiently," Stephanie replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "I contacted a probate attorney who specializes in quick estate settlements. Everything's been filed with the county courthouse." Marcus grabbed the folder before Stephanie could stop him, scanning the documents with increasingly dark eyes. As an accountant, he knew how to read legal paperwork. "This doesn't look right," he muttered. "The language is all wrong, and I've never heard of this law firm." "Are you calling me a liar?" Stephanie's voice rose to a near shriek. "That's Dorothy's signature right there, witnessed and everything." I moved closer to look over Marcus's shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs. The will was typed on official letterhead, complete with raised seal and signature lines. But I'd spent enough time helping Dorothy with her paperwork over the years to know her handwriting intimately. The signature was close, but the letter formation was slightly off. Someone had practiced copying her name, but they hadn't quite perfected her unique way of crossing her T's. "This is fake," I said quietly. The entire barbecue went silent. Even the neighbors seemed to stop their conversations to listen. Stephanie's face flushed red, but her eyes went cold. "Excuse me." I said, "This is fake. Dorothy's signature is forged, and I know because I helped her write her real will 2 years ago." Jake dropped his spatula, leaving burgers to burn forgotten on the grill. "Valerie, what are you talking about?" But Stephanie was already on the attack. "You're just jealous because Dorothy didn't leave you anything. Everyone knows you were always trying to manipulate her into giving you money. This is exactly the kind of desperate lie I'd expect from someone who's bitter about being left out." The accusation stung because it was so completely backwards. I'd given Dorothy money, not taken it. I'd saved her home and her dignity, asking for nothing in return except the promise that the land would stay protected. Now this woman was not only trying to steal my property, but she was also destroying my reputation in the process. Diana stepped between us before I could respond. "Stephanie, I remember Dorothy talking about her will. She specifically said the resort would go to a wildlife foundation, so it could never be developed." "Old people change their minds," Stephanie snapped, "especially when family members actually care enough to visit and help with medical bills." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Dorothy had complained repeatedly about Stephanie's absence during her cancer treatments. The only time she'd visited was to pressure Dorothy about selling the property. Jake's face was pale now, torn between defending his wife and believing his family. "Steph, maybe we should just wait a few weeks before finalizing anything. Let everyone process this." "Absolutely not." Stephanie snatched the will back from Marcus's hands. "I'm not letting family drama ruin a $3 million deal. Anyone who wants to challenge this will can take it up with my lawyer." She gathered her things with sharp, aggressive movements, clearly preparing to leave. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Which lawyer, Stephanie, because I'd like to call Dorothy's real attorney and ask him about this will." Stephanie froze. "That's none of your business." "Actually, it is my business. As Dorothy's great-nephew, I have legal standing to challenge estate documents. So does Diana, and so does Jake. If this will is legitimate, your lawyer won't mind answering a few questions." For just a moment, I saw panic flicker across Stephanie's face. Then her expression hardened into something truly ugly. "Fine, challenge it. Waste your money on lawyers and court fees. But in 2 weeks, those bulldozers are going to roll onto Pine Valley and there won't be anything any of you can do to stop it." She stormed toward her car designer heels, clicking angrily against the driveway. Jake hurried after her, calling her name, but she slammed the door and peeled out of the neighborhood like she was fleeing a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize she probably was. The remaining family members stood in stunned silence, looking at each other with the shell-shocked expressions of people who just watched their family explode. Diana was the first to speak. "We have to stop this," she said. "That resort is Dorothy's legacy. It's our legacy." "But how?" Marcus asked. "If she's already signed contracts with developers and if she's really got a legal will—" "The will is fake," I repeated more firmly this time. "I don't know how she did it, but that's not Dorothy's real signature." Jake returned from the driveway, his face grim. "She says if anyone tries to interfere with the sale, she'll sue for harassment and interference with business contracts." I wanted to tell them the truth right then. I wanted to explain that I owned the resort, that Stephanie had no legal claim to anything, that I could stop this nightmare with a single phone call to my lawyer. But something held me back. Maybe it was the promise I'd made to Dorothy to keep her financial troubles private. Maybe it was my own pride not wanting the family to know I'd essentially bought their inheritance out from under them. Or maybe deep down, I wanted to see exactly how far Stephanie was willing to go with this fraud. Over the next 3 days, I did my own investigation. Dorothy's real attorney, William Chen, confirmed that her legitimate will left the resort property to the Mountain Wildlife Foundation with small cash bequests to family members. He'd never heard of the law firm on Stephanie's documents. More disturbing was what I discovered about Stephanie's activities over the past 6 months. She'd been advertising cabin rentals online, collecting cash payments from weekend visitors, while telling the family that the property was too run down for guests. She'd pocketed thousands of dollars that should have gone to the estate money that was rightfully mine as the actual owner. But the real bombshell came when I checked the property records at the county courthouse. Stephanie had filed documents claiming ownership through inheritance, but she'd also applied for something called an emergency development permit that would allow construction to begin immediately after closing, bypassing normal environmental review processes. Someone had paid a lot of money to grease the wheels of local government, and that someone was planning to destroy Pine Valley before anyone could stop them. The Riverside County Planning Commission meeting was held in a fluorescent-lit conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment. I'd driven 4 hours to attend wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses to avoid being recognized by anyone who might report back to Stephanie. The agenda listed something called Clearwater Development Group Emergency Permit Application for a site described only as 200-acre parcel Pine Valley Road. I slipped into a back row seat just as the meeting began, surrounded by a mix of local residents, environmental activists, and men in expensive suits who looked distinctly out of place in rural mountain country. The chairman, a thin man with nervous energy, shuffled through his papers before calling the first item. Application CWD 2025-47 Emergency Development Permit for Industrial Facility Construction. One of the suit-wearing men stood up, introducing himself as Richard Hawkins from Clearwater Development Group. He was tall, professionally groomed, and spoke with the kind of smooth confidence that immediately made me suspicious. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearwater is excited to bring jobs and economic development to this region through our state-of-the-art waste processing facility. A woman in the front row shot to her feet. Waste processing. The application said residential development. Hawkins smiled without warmth. The application has been amended to reflect the project's true scope. We're building a comprehensive waste management facility that will handle organic and chemical waste from across 3 counties. The room erupted. Residents started shouting questions, demanding to know about environmental impact studies, water contamination risks, and air quality concerns. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, but the anger was too intense to control easily. I felt sick listening to Hawkins' answers. The facility would process low-level chemical waste from manufacturing plants, medical facilities, and research laboratories. Wastewater would be treated and released into local streams after appropriate filtration. Air emissions would be monitored and controlled within federal guidelines. Every word was corporate speak designed to hide the truth they were planning to turn Pine Valley into a dumping ground for toxic waste. A man sitting 2 rows ahead of me stood up, introducing himself as Dr. James Morrison, a hydrologist from the State University. Mr. Hawkins, have you conducted groundwater studies for this site? Because that stream system feeds directly into the municipal water supply for 3 towns downstream. Environmental studies are ongoing, Hawkins replied smoothly. All federal and state requirements will be met before construction begins. That's not what I asked, Dr. Morrison pressed. Have you studied the specific geological conditions at this site? Because the rock formations in that area are particularly porous. Any chemical contamination would spread rapidly through the underground water table. Hawkins's smile faltered slightly. As I said, all environmental concerns will be addressed through proper engineering. I was frantically taking notes, trying to understand the full scope of what they were planning. But the most chilling moment came when a local resident asked about community input. The property owner has requested expedited processing to avoid unnecessary delays, Hawkins explained. The purchase agreement includes provisions preventing external interference with the development timeline. The property owner, Stephanie, had signed contracts that would prevent the community from fighting the project even if they discovered the environmental dangers. She'd sold out an entire region's water supply for her $3 million payday. After the meeting, I lingered in the parking lot watching the interactions between Clearwater representatives and local officials. Money was changing hands, not literally, but in the form of handshakes that lasted too long. Private conversations by expensive cars and business cards exchanged with meaningful looks. I followed Hawkins to a restaurant in town, sitting at a corner booth where I could overhear his phone conversations. What I heard made my blood run cold. The permit should be finalized by Friday, he was saying. The owner doesn't know about the waste processing component, but that's not our problem. She signed the environmental waiver clauses. Stephanie had agreed to language that would make her legally responsible for any contamination while protecting Clearwater from lawsuits. She thought she was getting rich, but she was actually signing up to be the fall guy for an environmental disaster. But it got worse. Phase 2. Construction begins as soon as we clear the trees, Hawkins continued. The chemical storage tanks go in first before anyone can organize opposition. By the time locals figure out what we're really building, we'll have 50 million gallons of waste already on site. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. This wasn't just a waste processing facility. They were planning to store massive quantities of chemical waste in an area with no geological protection, no proper containment systems, and no emergency response infrastructure. Over the next 2 days, I researched Clearwater Development Group obsessively. They had a history of building waste facilities in rural areas, then abandoning them when environmental problems became too expensive to fix. Communities in Tennessee, Arkansas, and New Mexico were still dealing with contaminated water supplies from Clearwater projects. The company specialized in targeting financially desperate property owners, offering inflated purchase prices in exchange for legal agreements that transferred all environmental liability. They'd done this dozens of times, always managing to disappear into bankruptcy protection before cleanup costs became their responsibility. And now they had Stephanie in their crosshairs. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but then I discovered something that destroyed any sympathy I might have had. Hidden in the property records was evidence that Stephanie had known about the waste facility from the beginning. She'd received additional payments for agreeing to falsify environmental information, claiming the property had no water sources or wildlife habitats that required protection. She hadn't just been greedy. She'd been actively malicious, willing to poison an entire watershed for extra money. But the discovery that broke my heart came when I visited Dorothy's old attorney. William Chen had more than just Dorothy's will in his files. He had records of her final months, including detailed notes about her interactions with Stephanie. She was terrified, he told me sitting in his small office overlooking the town square. Stephanie had been pressuring her to change her will for months, but Dorothy refused. She wanted the land protected forever. He showed me documentation of Dorothy's increasing concern about her granddaughter-in-law's behavior. Stephanie had been visiting more frequently as Dorothy's health declined, always alone, always bringing gifts and flowers. But she'd also been asking detailed questions about Dorothy's medical treatments, her medications, and her mental state. The last time I saw Dorothy was 3 weeks before she passed, Chen continued. She was concerned that someone was interfering with her medications. She felt confused and disoriented after Stephanie's visits, but clear and alert at other times. The implication was horrifying. Had Stephanie been drugging Dorothy, trying to create evidence of mental incompetence that would make forging a will easier to defend? I thought about Dorothy's final weeks, how she'd seemed to fade so quickly after months of stable health. I'd attributed it to grief over losing her independence, but now I wondered if something more sinister had been happening. That night, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to an environmental lawyer named Sarah Chen, no relation to Dorothy's attorney who specialized in cases against corrupt development companies. The second was to my own lawyer, asking him to prepare documentation, proving my ownership of Pine Valley Resort. It was time to stop being a passive observer and start fighting back. But I had no idea that Stephanie's desperation was about to make this situation infinitely more dangerous. Sarah Chen's office was located in a renovated warehouse in the Arts District, filled with filing cabinets that contained evidence of corporate environmental crimes spanning 2 decades. She was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with short black hair and the kind of intense focus that made her seem like she could see through walls. "I've been watching Clearwater for 3 years," she told me, spreading aerial photographs of Pine Valley across her conference table. They're part of a larger network of companies that specialize in environmental crime. Same ownership, different names, always one step ahead of federal investigators. She showed me satellite images of their previous projects, brown scars on the landscape where toxic waste had leaked into soil and groundwater, communities where children developed cancer clusters, where farmers lost entire herds of cattle to poisoned streams, where families had to abandon homes that became uninhabitable. The FBI has been building a case against them, Sarah continued. But they needed someone on the inside, someone with direct knowledge of their bribery and fraud schemes. Your sister-in-law might have just provided that connection. I explained about the forged will, the illegal rental income, and Stephanie's knowledge of the true development plans. Sarah's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a prosecutor who just found the perfect witness. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "Someone with documentary evidence of their corrupt practices, but we have to move carefully. If Stephanie realizes you're investigating her, she might destroy evidence or disappear entirely. We developed a plan that would require patience and precision. Sarah would contact her FBI connections while I gathered more evidence of Stephanie's illegal activities. But first, we needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy reached. The answer came sooner than expected, and from a source I never anticipated. Jake called me at 6 a.m, his voice shaking with panic. "Valerie, something's wrong with Stephanie. She's been acting paranoid, installing security cameras around the house, checking her phone every few minutes. Last night, I caught her packing suitcases in the middle of the night. Maybe she's just nervous about the resort sale." I suggested, though my heart was already racing. "No, it's more than that. She's been making international phone calls, transferring money between different bank accounts. And Valerie, I found a gun in her purse." I nearly dropped the phone. Stephanie with a weapon was terrifying to consider, especially now that I knew the extent of her criminal activities. "Jake, you need to be careful around her. Don't confront her directly about anything. Just pay attention and let me know if she does anything suspicious." "There's something else?" he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think she's been drugging me. I've been feeling confused and tired after dinner every night, but I'm fine during the day when I'm at work. Last night I pretended to eat the dessert she made, then threw it away when she wasn't looking. I felt normal all evening." The pattern was repeating itself. Just like with Dorothy, Stephanie was using drugs to control and manipulate someone who might interfere with her plans. But why was she drugging Jake? What was she trying to prevent him from discovering? I got my answer 2 hours later when Jake called back, his voice tight with fear. "I went through our bank accounts after she left for work. Valerie, she's been stealing money from our joint account for months. $60,000 transferred to accounts I've never seen before. And she's been using my social security number to open credit cards." Identity theft on top of everything else. Stephanie wasn't just planning to disappear with the money from the resort sale. She was planning to leave Jake financially ruined in the process. "There's more," Jake continued. "I found a laptop hidden in her closet, password protected. I managed to get into it using our wedding date, and Valerie, there are files about all of us. Photos of our houses, information about our jobs, even school records for Marcus's kids." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of information?" "Everything. Social security numbers, credit reports, employment records. It's like she's been planning to steal all our identities." I thought about Dorothy's missing personal documents, the family heirlooms that had disappeared from the resort after her death. Stephanie had been collecting information and valuables, systematically preparing for a much larger crime than any of us had realized. But the most disturbing discovery came that afternoon when Jake sent me photographs from Stephanie's hidden laptop. Mixed in with our personal information were detailed floor plans of our homes, daily schedules, and even photographs taken from inside our houses when we weren't there. Stephanie had been stalking us, learning our routines, preparing for something that required intimate knowledge of our lives. The gun Jake found wasn't for protection. It was for eliminating witnesses. I called Sarah, immediately explaining about the identity theft and surveillance files. Her response was swift and decisive. "We're moving this investigation to emergency status," she said. "I'm calling the FBI right now. Your sister-in-law isn't just committing fraud, she's planning something that could get people killed." While Sarah coordinated with federal investigators, I made my own preparations. I installed new security systems at my house, changed all my passwords, and alerted my bank about potential identity theft. But most importantly, I finally called my lawyer about revealing my ownership of Pine Valley Resort. "The timing is actually perfect," he told me. "If you come forward now, before the fake sale closes, you can prevent the environmental disaster while providing evidence for the federal investigation. 2 birds with 1 stone." But first, we needed to make sure Stephanie couldn't destroy evidence or flee the country. That evening, Jake provided the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden in Stephanie's laptop were email exchanges with someone named Victor Petrov discussing asset liquidation and relocation services. The emails referenced numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands' false documentation services and what appeared to be an escape plan that would get Stephanie out of the United States within hours of the resort closing. She wasn't just planning to steal money from the resort sale. She was planning to disappear entirely, leaving behind a contaminated environment, ruined family members, and no way for anyone to seek justice. But Stephanie had made one critical mistake in all her careful planning. She'd assumed that nobody else cared enough about Pine Valley to investigate what she was doing. She'd underestimated the depth of my connection to that land and my willingness to fight for it. The next morning, I received a call that changed everything. Dr. Morrison, the hydrologist from the Planning Commission meeting, had been conducting his own investigation of the Pine Valley site. What he'd discovered was worse than any of us had imagined. "I've been testing water samples from that stream system for the past week," he told me. "Someone has already been dumping chemicals there. Low levels, but definitely present. Industrial solvents, heavy metals, traces of medical waste." The pollution had already begun. While Stephanie was negotiating her fake sale, Clearwater had been using the property as an illegal dumping ground, testing to see if anyone would notice environmental damage. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Right now, it's contained to a small area near the main lodge. But if they proceed with their full development plan, we're looking at contamination that could affect drinking water for 50,000 people downstream." 50,000 people. Stephanie's greed wasn't just threatening our family or even our community. It was potentially endangering the health and safety of an entire region. That's when I realized that staying silent about my ownership wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was time to reveal the truth, whatever the consequences might be. The FBI raid on Clearwater Development Group's headquarters happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning, coordinated across 3 states simultaneously. I watched the news coverage from Sarah Chen's office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and terror as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence that would hopefully put these criminals away forever. But Richard Hawkins wasn't going quietly. "This is harassment by environmental extremists," he told the television reporter, his polished confidence finally showing cracks. "Clearwater operates completely within federal guidelines. These baseless accusations will be proven false in court." Sarah muted the television and turned to me with grim satisfaction. "He can say whatever he wants to the media. We've got bank records proving they've been bribing officials across 6 states. This investigation is going to bring down a lot more than just one development company." The news reached Stephanie faster than I'd expected. According to Jake, she'd started making frantic phone calls within an hour of the raids, speaking in hushed voices and switching between languages he didn't recognize. She'd also begun demanding that he sign power of attorney documents, giving her control of his financial accounts. "I told her I needed time to think about it," Jake explained during our emergency meeting at Marcus's house. "But she's getting more aggressive. Last night she threatened to leave me if I didn't cooperate with her business decisions." Diana leaned forward across the kitchen table, her expression fierce with protective anger. "Jake, you know this isn't about business decisions. She's trying to steal everything you own before she disappears." "But where would she go?" Jake asked, still unable to fully accept the scope of his wife's betrayal. "And why we have a good life here. She doesn't need to run away." Marcus had been quiet through most of our conversation, but now he spoke up with the methodical precision that made him such a good accountant. "I've been tracking the money trail from Dorothy's estate. The rental income, Stephanie collected the credit cards she opened in your name, the transfers from your joint account. It adds up to almost $100,000. $100,000? Jake's face went pale. "That's just what I can find in public records," Marcus continued. "I suspect there's a lot more hidden in accounts we don't know about. Someone planning to steal $3 million from a property sale doesn't just wake up one morning and decide to become a criminal. This has been going on for a long time. I wanted to tell them about the Cayman Islands accounts and Victor Petrov, but that information had come from Jake's illegal search of Stephanie's laptop. We had to be careful not to compromise the FBI investigation with evidence that couldn't be used in court. Instead, I focused on what we could prove legally. I think it's time for me to contact Dorothy's real attorney about challenging the will. Even if we can't stop the sale immediately, we can create enough legal uncertainty to prevent the closing." Diana nodded enthusiastically. "And I'll start calling environmental groups about the water contamination. If enough people know what's really planned for that land, public pressure might slow things down." But Stephanie was already ahead of us. That afternoon, Jake received a call from someone claiming to be an attorney representing Stephanie's interests. The man explained that Jake was being investigated for financial crimes related to Dorothy's estate and that he should avoid discussing family business with anyone until the investigation was complete. "It's intimidation," Sarah explained when Jake told us about the call. "Classic criminal behavior when they feel cornered. She's trying to isolate him from family support while she finalizes her escape plan." The intimidation campaign escalated quickly. Marcus received a visit from someone claiming to be a county tax assessor, asking detailed questions about his property and financial records. Diana's employer got an anonymous complaint alleging that she was stealing from the company. All of us were being targeted, our lives disrupted by a coordinated effort to discredit and distract us. But the attack that crossed the line came when someone broke into my house. I came home from work to find my front door standing open, furniture overturned, and personal papers scattered across the floor. The intruders had been looking for something specific. They'd ignored expensive electronics and jewelry, focusing instead on financial documents, legal papers, and anything related to Pine Valley Resort. They'd found my ownership documents. The manila folder containing my purchase agreement, LLC formation papers, and correspondence with Dorothy was missing. Stephanie now had proof that I was the real owner of the resort, which meant she knew her entire scheme was about to collapse. That's when she made her most desperate move yet. Jake called me at midnight, whispering urgently into the phone. "Valerie, I think Stephanie is planning to burn down the resort buildings." "What do you mean?" "I followed her tonight when she said she was going to check on the property one last time. She had gasoline cans in her car, and I saw her spreading something around the main lodge. When I tried to get closer, she heard me and came back to the car angry, saying the deal was too important to let family interference ruin it." Arson. Stephanie was planning to destroy the evidence of her crimes while collecting insurance money to compensate for the failed sale. It was the action of someone who'd completely abandoned any pretense of legality or morality. But she'd made a critical error. When I'd purchased Pine Valley Resort, I'd installed a comprehensive security system to protect the property during Dorothy's declining health. Hidden cameras throughout the property had been recording everything, including Stephanie's illegal rental activities and her recent visits with suspicious materials. If she tried to burn down those buildings, we'd have video evidence of arson. And if she succeeded in destroying the structures, she'd also be destroying the evidence that Clearwater needed to justify their development permits. I called Sarah, immediately explaining about the arson threat and the security footage. Her response was swift and decisive. "We're moving tonight. FBI agents are already positioned around the property, and we've got environmental protection crews standing by. If she tries to destroy evidence, we'll arrest her in the act. If she tries to run, we'll stop her before she reaches the airport." But as events unfolded over the next 12 hours, I realized that none of us had fully understood how far Stephanie was willing to go to protect her scheme. The fire started at 3 in the morning. I smelled the smoke before I saw the orange glow above the tree line. From my bedroom window, Pine Valley Resort was just visible as a distant cluster of lights nestled in the mountains. But now those familiar warm yellow glows were being overwhelmed by the harsh brightness of flames. My phone rang as I was pulling on clothes and grabbing my car keys. Sarah Chen's voice was tense but controlled. "Fire department is en route, but it's going to be close. Stephanie's car was spotted leaving the area 20 minutes ago. We have units trying to intercept her, but she's got a head start." I drove toward the resort faster than I'd ever driven those winding mountain roads, my heart hammering with the terror that I might arrive to find Dorothy's beloved lodge reduced to ashes. But as I rounded the final curve, I saw something that made me pull over and stare in amazement. The fire hadn't spread. Emergency vehicles surrounded the main lodge, but only one small building was actually burning, an old storage shed that had been empty for years. Firefighters were already controlling the blaze, their powerful hoses creating clouds of steam that glowed eerily in the floodlights. Sarah met me at the parking area, her expression grim but satisfied. "Your security system worked perfectly. We've got everything on video." She led me to a mobile command center where FBI agents were reviewing footage on multiple monitors. The timestamps showed Stephanie arriving at 2:30 in the morning, carrying gasoline containers and what appeared to be accelerant materials. But instead of targeting the valuable main buildings, she'd focused on the small shed. "Why the storage building?" I asked. "If she wanted to destroy evidence, wouldn't she go after the lodge or the cabins?" One of the agents, a woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, answered without looking away from the monitors. She was trying to create a distraction. While emergency crews responded to the fire, she planned to break into the main lodge and steal financial records that might incriminate her. On screen, Stephanie could be seen using bolt cutters to break the lock on the lodge's rear door. She'd spent nearly 15 minutes inside, emerging with a large duffel bag filled with documents. But she'd made a fatal error in her timing. "We were already watching the property," the agent continued. "The moment she lit that fire, we moved in. She never had a chance to escape." They showed me footage of Stephanie's arrest captured by cameras she didn't know existed. When federal agents surrounded her car 3 miles from the resort she'd been carrying, evidence that sealed her fate, Dorothy's real financial records, including bank statements showing the payments I'd made to keep the resort solvent. But the most damning evidence was found in her laptop, which she'd brought along to delete files remotely. Instead, FBI computer specialists recovered everything: her communications with Viktor Petrov, records of the Cayman Islands accounts, detailed plans for identity theft, and most shocking of all, a confession. Stephanie had been recording herself, apparently planning to use the videos as insurance against Clearwater Development Group if they tried to cheat her. In rambling, self-justifying monologues, she'd explained her entire scheme: forging Dorothy's will, drugging family members, coordinating with corrupt developers, and planning to flee the country with stolen money. She thought she was protecting herself, Sarah explained as we watched segments of the recordings. Instead, she created a complete record of her crimes. The confession videos revealed details that shocked even the experienced federal investigators. Stephanie had been planning this for over 2 years, gathering information about family members, building relationships with criminal organizations, and systematically stealing money to fund her escape plan. Most disturbing was her casual discussion of contingency plans that included eliminating witnesses who might threaten her scheme. The gun Jake had found wasn't for protection, it was for murder. "We estimate she would have killed at least 3 people if her plan had proceeded," Agent Williams told me later. "Your brother, probably you, once she discovered your ownership of the resort, and potentially Dorothy's real attorney to prevent him from exposing the forged will." The scope of Stephanie's planned crimes was so extensive that it required coordination between multiple federal agencies. The Environmental Protection Agency began emergency testing of the resort's water supply, finding evidence of illegal chemical dumping that would have contaminated the entire watershed. The Department of Justice opened investigations into corrupted local officials who'd accepted bribes from Clearwater. The Treasury Department traced money laundering operations that spanned 4 countries. But for me, the most important moment came when I finally told my family the truth about owning Pine Valley Resort. We gathered in the main lodge 3 days after Stephanie's arrest, surrounded by crime scene tape, but finally able to speak freely without fear of surveillance or retaliation. Jake looked exhausted, but relieved. Diana was angry but determined, and Marcus was already making plans for restoration and cleanup. 5 years ago, Dorothy called me in the middle of the night. I began, and then I told them everything. The medical bills, the desperate financial situation, my decision to use my inheritance to save the resort, and the promise I'd made to keep it protected forever. When I finished, the silence stretched for long minutes. I'd expected anger, accusations of deception, demands for explanations. Instead, Diana started crying. "You saved it," she whispered. "When the rest of us didn't even know it needed saving, you saved it." Jake was the next to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "Valerie, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what Stephanie was really like, if I'd paid attention to what was happening—" "None of this is your fault," I interrupted. "She fooled everyone. Even law enforcement was impressed by how sophisticated her deception was." Marcus, ever practical, was already thinking about the future. "So what happens now? With the resort, I mean. What are your plans for it?" I'd been thinking about that question for days, but the answer had crystallized while watching the firefighters save Dorothy's lodge from Stephanie's desperate arson attempt. Dorothy wanted it protected forever, I said. She wanted it to stay wild and beautiful, but she also wanted families to be able to experience what we experienced here as children. I'm thinking about partnering with the Wildlife Foundation she mentioned in her real will, creating some kind of conservation trust that would preserve the land while allowing sustainable tourism. Diana's eyes lit up. Like an eco-resort, something that could provide income for maintenance while protecting the environment. Exactly. Educational programs for school groups, hiking trails that teach people about forest ecology, maybe some research facilities for studying mountain ecosystems. Everything Dorothy would have loved. Over the following weeks, as the legal proceedings against Stephanie and Clearwater unfolded, we began making those plans reality. The Wildlife Foundation was thrilled to partner with us, providing expertise in conservation management and environmental education. Local universities expressed interest in establishing field research stations. Tourism boards started discussing sustainable development initiatives that could provide economic benefits without environmental damage. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later when Stephanie's trial concluded. She'd attempted to claim she was a victim of Clearwater's manipulation, but the confession videos destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. The evidence of identity theft, fraud, attempted murder, and environmental crimes was overwhelming. When the judge sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison, I felt like Dorothy's spirit could finally rest peacefully. Jake had filed for divorce within days of her arrest, and he'd thrown himself into helping restore the resort with an energy that seemed to heal his damaged trust in family relationships. Marcus and Diana became regular volunteers, bringing their children to help with conservation projects and educational programs. The resort reopened 8 months later as Pine Valley Environmental Education Center, offering family camping experiences that emphasized connection with nature and respect for the environment. The old cabins were renovated with solar power and composting systems. The main lodge became a classroom for teaching sustainable living practices. The contaminated areas were cleaned up and converted into demonstration sites, showing how human activity could harm or help natural ecosystems. But most importantly, families could still experience the magic that Dorothy had created 60 years earlier. The peace of sleeping under starlight, the joy of fishing in crystal-clear streams, the sense of belonging in a place where nature and humanity existed in harmony. Standing on the lodge porch on our first anniversary celebration, watching children play the same games I'd played decades earlier, I finally understood what Dorothy had meant when she'd asked me to keep the place wild and beautiful. She hadn't just been talking about preserving trees and streams. She'd been talking about preserving the wildness in human hearts, the beautiful connections between generations, and the sacred trust that comes from caring for something bigger than ourselves. 2 years have passed since Stephanie's conviction, and Pine Valley Environmental Education Center has become everything Dorothy dreamed it could be. As I write this, I'm sitting in the same spot where she taught me to identify different bird calls, watching my 5-year-old nephew Tommy carefully release a butterfly we'd raised from a caterpillar in our nature education program. The transformation has been remarkable. Where once there were only a dozen aging cabins and a struggling restaurant, we now have a thriving center that hosts over 3,000 visitors each year. Families come to learn about sustainable living students, conduct research on forest ecology, and people seeking healing from urban stress find restoration in the mountain wilderness. Jake has become our full-time operations manager, channeling his construction experience into building environmentally friendly facilities and leading volunteer work groups. He's also found love again with Rebecca Martinez, an environmental science teacher who shares his passion for conservation and his appreciation for simple, honest relationships. Their wedding will be held next month under the same pine trees where Dorothy and her husband exchanged vows 60 years ago. Diana manages our educational programs, developing curricula that teach children about environmental stewardship through hands-on activities and direct experience with nature. Her own children have become our most enthusiastic junior naturalists, able to identify dozens of local plant and animal species and explain complex ecological relationships with the confidence of budding scientists. Marcus handles our finances with the same meticulous attention to detail that helped uncover Stephanie's crimes, ensuring that every dollar is used responsibly to support our conservation mission. He's also coordinated with other family-owned conservation properties throughout the region, creating a network of protected spaces that preserve critical wildlife corridors. The environmental restoration has exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Dr. Morrison's team has documented the return of native fish species that hadn't been seen in the area for decades. The contamination from Clearwater's illegal dumping has been completely remediated, leaving water quality that's actually better than before the pollution occurred. We've also become a model for sustainable tourism development. Visitors stay in solar-powered cabins built from locally sourced materials, eat meals prepared from organic ingredients grown in our demonstration gardens, and participate in activities that teach environmental responsibility rather than consuming natural resources. But perhaps the most meaningful change is how our family has healed from the trauma of Stephanie's betrayal. We've learned to trust each other again, to communicate openly about concerns and conflicts, and to recognize that protecting what we love sometimes requires difficult decisions and personal sacrifices. Jake has been through extensive therapy to understand how he was manipulated and to rebuild his confidence in his own judgment. He's become an advocate for domestic abuse survivors, speaking to support groups about the subtle ways that psychological manipulation can control and isolate victims. His strength and vulnerability have helped other people recognize dangerous relationships and seek help before violence escalates. Last month, we received news that Clearwater Development Group's corporate network has been completely dismantled. Richard Hawkins and 7 other executives were sentenced to federal prison for environmental crimes, fraud, and racketeering. Their illegal activities affected 23 communities across 8 states, but aggressive prosecution and environmental restoration efforts have begun healing the damage they caused. Viktor Petrov was arrested in the Cayman Islands and extradited to face charges of money laundering and conspiracy. The financial network he operated helped dozens of criminals hide stolen assets, but his capture has allowed authorities to recover millions of dollars that can be returned to victims and used for environmental cleanup projects. Stephanie herself has become a case study in criminal psychology, with researchers studying how someone with no obvious mental illness or traumatic background could develop such elaborate and ruthless schemes. Her confession videos are used in law enforcement training programs to help investigators recognize sophisticated fraud operations. But we try not to think about Stephanie very often. Dorothy always said that holding on to anger was like trying to grow flowers in poisoned soil. Nothing beautiful can flourish when the foundation is toxic. Instead, we focus on the positive changes that emerged from confronting her crimes. The most beautiful example happened last week when a family from Portland visited the center for their annual camping trip. Their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been struggling with anxiety and depression following her parents' difficult divorce. But after 3 days of hiking, fishing, and learning about forest ecology, she'd transformed into a confident, curious child who asked endless questions about everything from soil composition to bird migration patterns. "This place saved our family," her mother told me as they prepared to leave. Emma hasn't had a single panic attack since we arrived. She's sleeping through the night, eating meals without arguments, and talking about becoming a scientist when she grows up. I don't know what you've created here, but it's magical. That's what Dorothy understood that took me years to learn. Places like Pine Valley aren't just about preserving trees and streams. They're about preserving the conditions that allow human beings to remember who they really are underneath all the stress and confusion of modern life. Children discover their natural curiosity and sense of wonder. Adults reconnect with the peace and perspective that comes from being part of something larger than themselves. Families learn to communicate and cooperate in ways that artificial entertainment and digital distractions make difficult in urban environments. We're already planning expansions that will allow us to serve even more families while maintaining our commitment to environmental protection. A partnership with the State University will establish research facilities studying climate change adaptation in mountain ecosystems. Collaboration with tribal nations will incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into our educational programs. International partnerships will share our sustainable tourism model with conservation projects in other countries. But the most important expansion is happening in the hearts and minds of people who visit us. They return to their home communities as advocates for environmental protection, supporters of sustainable living practices, and believers in the possibility of creating positive change in a world that often feels overwhelming and hopeless. That's Dorothy's real legacy. Not just the land she protected, but the people who carry her values forward into their own lives and communities. As I finish writing this story, Tommy has fallen asleep in my lap, exhausted from a day of exploring and discovering. His butterfly notebook is clutched in his small hands, filled with careful drawings of every species we observed together. Tomorrow, he'll add today's discoveries to the nature journal he's keeping for his school's environmental studies project. In a few years, he'll be old enough to understand the full story of how Pine Valley was saved from destruction. He'll learn about Stephanie's crimes about the environmental disaster that was prevented, about the legal battles and family conflicts that nearly tore us apart. But he'll also understand that the most important lesson isn't about defeating villains or solving mysteries. It's about recognizing when something precious is threatened, finding the courage to take action even when the cost is high, and trusting that telling the truth ultimately creates more healing than hiding it. Dorothy always said that every generation has to choose whether to protect or destroy the world they inherit. I'm proud that our family chose protection, but I'm even prouder that we're teaching the next generation to make that same choice with confidence, wisdom, and hope. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect something you loved, even when others didn't understand why it mattered so much to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps other people find the courage to stand up for what's right in their own lives. Thank you for following this journey with me, and remember that every small action we take to protect our environment and support our families creates ripples of positive change that extend far beyond what we can see. If this story moved, you please like this video, subscribe for more family stories about overcoming challenges, and share it with anyone who might need inspiration to trust their instincts and fight for what matters. May you always find the strength to protect what you love and the wisdom to know when speaking up is the most loving thing you can do.